So let me ask you something, and I want you to actually think about this for a second, not just kind of nod and move on. When was the last time you sat down and really looked at your finances? Like, opened the accounts, saw the numbers, traced where the money actually went last month, not the version of it you carry around in your head, the real version, the one with the actual figures. For a lot of people, the answer to that question is either a while ago or, honestly, I'd try not to. And here's the thing, that's not laziness. That's not irresponsibility. That's something much more interesting and, honestly, much more human than either of those explanations would suggest. My name is Threk, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, the psychology behind it, and why intelligent, capable, hard-working people somehow end up stuck in the same financial patterns year after year, despite genuinely wanting something different. And what I've come to believe, after thinking about this obsessively for longer than I probably should admit, is that the biggest obstacle most people face isn't income. It isn't opportunity. It isn't even knowledge, really. It's the stories, the specific, semi-convincing, completely understandable narratives that people tell themselves about why their situation is the way it is, why change isn't really possible right now, and why the rules that seem to work for other people probably don't apply to them. These stories feel true. Some of them even contain a grain of truth, but they function as invisible walls. And most people have been living inside them for so long, they've stopped noticing the walls are there. Today we're going through 5 of the most common ones, and I want to be clear, I'm not here to lecture anyone. I've told myself versions of most of these at different points. That's kind of the whole reason I find this stuff so fascinating. These aren't signs of failure, they're signs of being human. But understanding them, really understanding why they form and what they're doing, is one of those perspective shifts that, if you let it land properly, genuinely changes how you make decisions. So, let's get into it. Lie number 1. I'll start when I earn more. This one is probably the most universally told financial lie in existence, and it's so seductive because it's structured like a plan. It sounds responsible, it sounds like patience. I'm not in a position right now, but once things improve, I'll get serious. And your brain files that away under sensible financial thinking, when really what it's doing is indefinitely postponing the most valuable resource you have, which is time. Here's the thing about the "I'll start when I earn more" belief. It contains a hidden assumption that is almost never examined. The assumption is, the problem is income, that if the income were higher, the behavior would naturally change. But there's an enormous amount of evidence, both in research and in just watching how people actually live, that suggests income increases rarely produce the financial change people expect them to. They produce lifestyle expansion. The income goes up, the spending adjusts, the margin stays roughly the same, and the original plan to get serious gets quietly moved to the next income threshold. There's actually a name for this: lifestyle inflation. And it's not a character flaw, it's a deeply wired human tendency. We adapt to our circumstances remarkably fast. A salary that would have felt luxurious at 23 feels uncomfortably tight at 31, not because the number changed, because the life built around it expanded to fill the space. Which means if you're waiting for income to solve the problem, you may be waiting for something that structurally isn't designed to solve it. The reframe here is uncomfortable but important. The habit of managing money well doesn't grow from having more of it, it grows from practicing with whatever amount you currently have. The person who learns to direct $50 a week intentionally at 30 is not the same financial person at 40 as the one who spent that same decade waiting for the raise that would finally make it worth starting. The amounts are different, but the skills, the habits, the psychological relationship with money, those compound just like interest does, and they start from wherever you are, not from wherever you're planning to be. I'm not saying income doesn't matter, it absolutely does, but income is the accelerant. not the engine. The engine is behavior, and behavior can start today. Lie number 2. I'm just not a money person. Oh, this one. This one is interesting because it usually comes dressed with self-awareness, like the person saying it isn't in denial, they're being honest about themselves. I'm just not wired that way. Numbers aren't my thing. I'm more of a creative person. And there's something almost endearing about it, except for the fact that it's quietly doing enormous damage. Because what "I'm not a money person" actually means, when you translate it into its functional implication, is the rules of personal finance don't really apply to me in the same way, and it's fine if I don't engage with them deeply. And that framing, that there exists a category of person to whom financial literacy is simply not relevant, is just not grounded in reality. Money isn't a personality trait, it's a system. And the rules of that system, how compound interest works, what inflation does to savings over time, how debt structures operate, those rules apply to everyone with equal indifference to whether they identify as a money person or not. The mortgage doesn't charge you less because numbers aren't your thing. The retirement account doesn't grow faster for people who find finance fascinating. The system operates whether you're engaged with it or not. What's actually happening when someone says they're not a money person is usually one of two things. Either they've had some early experiences with money, maybe growing up in a household where finances were stressful or chaotic or simply never discussed, that built an association between thinking about money and feeling anxious or inadequate. Or they tried to engage with personal finance at some point, found the language intimidating and the learning curve steeper than expected, and quietly decided it wasn't for them. Both of those responses are completely understandable. Neither of them is a fixed personality trait. The practical reframe is this: you don't need to become obsessed with finance. You don't need to read balance sheets for fun or follow 17 investing podcasts. You need a small number of concepts understood well enough to make better decisions. Compound interest, expense ratios, the difference between an asset and a liability, automated saving. That's genuinely most of it for most people. The money person identity is not required. The basic literacy is. Lie number 3. My financial situation is too far gone to fix. This one is heavier than the first two. It carries a specific kind of weight that I think anyone who's ever felt genuinely behind financially will recognize immediately. It's not quite hopelessness. It's more like a resigned arithmetic. I've done the math. I'm 37 with almost nothing saved and a fair amount of debt. The compounding math that works for someone who started at 22 doesn't work for me anymore. The window closed. And I want to spend some real time here because this belief is both the emotionally understandable and the most empirically wrong one of the 5. Let me be honest about something first. The math is real. Starting earlier is genuinely better. A 22-year-old who invests consistently for 40 years is in a structurally different position than someone who starts at 40 and invests for 25. I'm not going to pretend the time variable doesn't matter, because it does, significantly. But here's what the too far gone narrative consistently gets wrong. It frames the choice as optimal outcome versus no outcome, when the actual choice is current trajectory versus improved trajectory. Because here's what staying exactly where you are produces over the next 10 or 15 years. That outcome is calculable. It isn't neutral. Doing nothing doesn't preserve your current position, it actively generates a worse one. Debt compounds, inflation erodes purchasing power, the absence of invested assets is not a static state, it's a direction. And too far gone to fix almost always implicitly compares the current situation to some ideal path that was never taken, rather than comparing the current situation to what happens if nothing changes. The more useful question is never, am I where I should be? It's always, what does the next 10 years look like from here if I change the behavior versus if I don't? And in almost every real situation, not hypothetical, not theoretical, real situations with real amounts of debt and real amounts of age, the answer to that question is meaningfully different. Not perfect, not what it could have been at 22, but meaningfully, practically, life-altering different. There's a version of someone who is 42, carries $20,000 in credit card debt, has minimal savings, and decides to engage seriously with this stuff. And that person's financial life at 55 looks categorically different from the version of the same person who accepted the too far gone story and stayed on the same path. That second version isn't a redemption arc or a fairy tale. It's just math applied to a different set of inputs. Lie number 4. I deserve to enjoy my money now. Life is short. Okay, so this one requires some careful handling because there's a completely legitimate version of this idea, and I want to be respectful of that before I explain why the lie version of it is so financially destructive. The legitimate version is deferring all pleasure indefinitely in pursuit of some theoretical future financial state is not a coherent life strategy. Spending money on experiences, relationships, comfort, and joy is not a moral failure. Money is a tool, and its purpose includes being used, not just accumulated. That's all real, and I believe it genuinely. The lie version is when life is short becomes the justification for every individual spending decision, regardless of whether that decision is actually producing joy, connection, or meaningful experience. And this is where it gets subtle, because most of the spending that gets rationalized under "I deserve to enjoy my money" isn't actually producing those things. It's producing a brief neutralization of discomfort, a momentary spike of dopamine followed by a return to baseline minus the money. The dinner out that you genuinely enjoyed with people you love, that's life being short. The 3 Amazon impulse buys at 11:30 on a Tuesday that you've already half forgotten about, that's not really enjoying your money. That's using the life is short narrative as cover for spending that doesn't actually correspond to the values the narrative is supposed to represent. Here's what I find genuinely interesting about this one. People who are most financially stressed are often the ones most likely to invoke the life is short justification for present spending, and there's a painful irony in that. Because chronic financial stress, the low-grade background anxiety of not having enough buffer, of knowing one unexpected expense could destabilize everything, is itself a massive quality-of-life drain. The spending that's being justified as enjoying the present is often partially funded by future stress that will significantly diminish that same present enjoyment. The reframe isn't deny yourself everything. It's be honest about whether the spending is actually producing the experience the justification claims it is. Enjoy money deliberately and richly on the things that genuinely matter, and be honest about the rest. Lie number 5. I already know what I need to know. Okay, so this last one is sneaky. It doesn't feel like a lie because it doesn't feel defensive. It just feels like a status update. I know the basics. Spend less than you earn, save, invest. I get it. And because personal finance is often presented at that basic level, it's easy to feel like you've covered the syllabus without having applied any of it in any meaningful depth. But there's a significant difference between understanding a concept at the level of being able to explain it in a sentence and understanding it at the level of having internalized it deeply enough that it actually changes your behavior under real conditions. Most people know that compound interest is powerful. Very few people have really sat with what their own specific numbers look like over their own specific timeline in a way that creates genuine urgency. Most people know that fees matter in investing. Far fewer have actually checked the expense ratios on the funds in their retirement account. Most people know the general shape of a budget. Many fewer have ever done a real, honest line-by-line accounting of where the money actually went last month. The "I already know" story functions as a door that closes off further inquiry, and the cost of that closed door isn't just the information not gathered, it's the behavior not changed by information you technically already have but haven't deeply engaged with. What's usually behind the gap between knowing and doing isn't laziness, it's one of a few things. Either the knowledge isn't as deep as it feels, because deep understanding tends to produce urgency, and urgency tends to produce action, or there's an emotional barrier that information alone doesn't address, which is often the case with money behaviors that are tangled up with identity, family history, or fear. In either case, "I already know what I need to know" isn't a conclusion, it's a conversation stopper, and the questions it stops are often exactly the right ones. The thread connecting all five. Here's what I find fascinating about these 5 lies when you lay them out next to each other. They're all doing the same job. They're all functioning as protection against something uncomfortable, against the uncomfortable of starting, against the anxiety of engaging with real numbers, against the grief of feeling behind, against the friction of delayed gratification, against the humbling experience of realizing there's still more to learn and apply. They are not signs of stupidity, they are signs of self-protection, and understanding that distinction matters because it changes how you approach dismantling them. You don't force your way through protective beliefs with willpower and self-criticism. That almost never works in a lasting way. You understand why they formed, acknowledge what they were trying to do, and then, gently, patiently, with some actual curiosity, you test them against reality. What actually happens if you start with what you have right now instead of waiting for more? What actually changes if you engage with the money stuff even though it doesn't feel natural? What does the next 10 years look like from here if the behavior changes? What would you spend money on if you were being completely honest about what produces genuine joy versus what just produces relief? What would you find if you went deeper into one financial concept you thought you already understood? These aren't rhetorical questions, they're the actual questions, and they have real, specific, useful answers, but you have to be willing to ask them. Before you go, if there's one thing I want you to take from this video, it's not a tactic or a tip or a number, it's this. The financial life you want is not primarily blocked by income or opportunity or the time you didn't start. It's primarily blocked by the stories running quietly in the background that have convinced you that now isn't the right time, that you're not the right kind of person, that your situation is the exception, that enjoyment and security are in conflict, or that you've already learned what there is to learn. Those stories are not the truth. They feel like the truth because they've been reinforced for a long time, and because challenging them is uncomfortable in ways that the stories themselves are specifically designed to prevent. But they are not the truth, and the distance between accepting them and examining them is genuinely one of the most financially meaningful moves a person can make. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be a money person. You don't need to start from a perfect position or a perfect age or a perfect income. You need to start from here, with honesty about what the lies have been costing you and some quiet curiosity about the next chapter looks like if you stop telling them. That's enough. That's actually more than enough. I'll see you in the next one.